This right here is some eyes wide open kind of bullshit. We got power elite, occult rituals, adult parties. The background behind the assassination of the Kennedys in the US, Israeli gangsters, mobsters, the whole nine yards. In this episode of Whitney Webb's book review that I'm doing, One Nation Under Blackmail, we're going to get into a lot of that history, again, leading up to current events. Why was Charlie Kirk assassinated? Does the book, One Nation Under Blackmail by Whitney Webb, give us any foundational support for what exactly happened and why it is Charlie Kirk allegedly said nearly, like, I think less than 24 hours before he was killed, they're going to kill me for this in relation to Israel. So let's look at the background of this. Now, this book, we're going to get into the details. So let's dive into it right now. The devil's in the details. Let's go. Now, if you haven't done this series with me before, this is a book series on One Nation Under Blackmail by Whitney Webb, and I've got it on screen right here. And I read large portions of this book. And so while a lot of what I teased at the beginning is going to come up, sex parties, yes, and blackmail for sure, and the assassination or the background behind the assassination of the Kennedys, yes, all of that stuff is in here. However, this is a book review, and I actually read large sections of this book and then riff on things from time to time, pointing out what I find important for you and why I'm highlighting that particular section. Large sections I highlight. So these are typically done in about an hour. I have a lot to cover on this episode. It's not for everyone. This style of video is not for everyone, but there are some doozies in it, especially at the back end when we talk about those sex parties. And the Kennedys and all this with that, it gets really, really crazy. So you're going to want to pay attention. If you can get through the dry part in the middle, maybe you can have some real fun at the end. At least I think it's kind of fun. Anyways, let's get into One Nation Under Blackmail. I'm going to go ahead and skip to the chapter we're on, which is Roy Cohn's favorite bank. And again, you need to watch the foundational videos on this that come before it to kind of have a chance to follow along. But I think you're going to enjoy it nonetheless, even if you haven't done the foundational stuff. We're going to skip just a bit. This is all the stuff that I've already done that you're seeing on screen. And when I get to, there it is, Cohn Under Fire is where we're going to start today. Now, get a copy of this book for yourself so you can read along, because I skip a lot of stuff. All the stuff that's white, I just skipped. So I'm going to cover a lot. But if you want to get all the frickin' shit in between, which is a lot, you're going to need to buy a copy of your own book. And I got an affiliate link that's going to be in the description of this video where you can click on it and buy a copy of this book at no extra charge, but I get a little spiff for my channel if you buy that through me. So please buy a copy of this book for yourself using my affiliate link so I can get a little bit of a spiff off the top. Not much, but it's not going to cost you a dime extra, but it does help the channel. All right, so let's go ahead and get into Cohn Under Fire. I'm going to start reading. I'm going to start commenting as we go. Here we go. What could have been good times for Roy Cohn were marred by his ongoing feud with the Kennedys, namely Robert F. Kennedy. And a lot of this chapter is going to talk about the Kennedys. And if you know anything about history, you know that John F. Kennedy was assassinated, of course, by Lee Harvey Oswald, so the story goes, and that Jack Ruby killed that person, Lee Harvey Oswald. Jack Ruby comes up in this chapter as well. Those people, and by the way, allegations have been around for decades and decades that this was an assassination because of Kennedy's mob ties. We're going to talk about the mob ties. Other people said it had to do with elements inside of our government that killed the president himself. That's going to come up in peripheral ways in this well. Also, money and mobsters, all that shit is in here. You're gonna get a good dose of it, and other Kennedys and their war with Roy Cohn. And so again, let's continue on now. So again, this is a quote that's in here now about Robert. So I'm going to read the whole sentence over again. What could have been good times for Roy Cohn was marred by his ongoing feud with the Kennedys, namely Robert F. Kennedy. I knew when Bobby Kennedy was lurking nearby, nothing good could happen to me, Cohn was known to have said. He was particularly concerned after learning of John F. Kennedy's plans to run for president. So Bobby Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, the Kennedy brothers, lots of tragedy and shit behind that, lots of stories, a lot of rumors, a lot of myths. We're going to talk about the foundational shit behind it. As it would likely mean that his mortal enemy, who's the Kennedys, would be appointed to a powerful position in a future administration. Cohn had done all he could to keep the Kennedys from power by vigorously supporting Lyndon Johnson in the Democratic primary. So again, he doesn't like the Kennedys. He's afraid John F. Kennedy's going to get elected president, and his mortal enemy, Bobby Kennedy, would get a higher position in Kennedy's presidency. So the Kennedys were not so easily thwarted, and once Robert Kennedy became Attorney General, the feud became even more acrimonious and particularly dangerous for Cohn. Cohn sought refuge in his powerful connections with the now included and even more overt ties to major figures in organized crime. Indeed, the same year that John Kennedy won the presidential election in 1960, Cohn was the guest of honor at a New Year's Eve party hosted by Mo Dalitz, the Ohio-based gangster who was a close associate of Meyer Lansky and a key figure in the Jewish mob. What you need on the high-level take of all this book is that, yes, there were hints that the mob had something to do with John F. Kennedy's assassination. And here we see Cohn and his ties to the mob, Jewish mob, and mobsters like Dalitz, didn't like Bobby Kennedy, was fighting against them, and this led to a feud, and maybe people getting killed, maybe presidents getting killed. So let's go with this. Now, Cohn initially attempted to smooth things over with Kennedy, writing a letter claiming that he harbored no ill will towards him, and a gesture that was ignored. So again, if anybody tries to pull that bullshit that no, there was no feud between the two of them, look at this letter we unsurfaced where he was trying to be nice. Yeah, when you know that you're at war with somebody, you sometimes will write something like, hey, let's stop not fighting. It doesn't mean you're not still fighting. It just means you're gonna, let's try to like smooth the waters. Let's not have it be ugly, like somebody's getting their head blown off. All right. Roy felt, and rightfully so, that they were coming after him. And in fact, there was a Get Roy Cohn team that was put together and a Get Jimmy Hoffa team put together. Jimmy Hoffa from the Teamsters, mobsters. This kind of stuff is all going to come into play with the assassination of Kennedy in some roundabout way. The creation of the Get Roy Cohn team by the Kennedys, by Robert Kennedy-led Justice Department. So the creation of the Get Roy Cohn team led by Robert Kennedy-led Justice Department was attested to by Robert Urim, then Assistant U.S. Attorney in New York, while many others have noted the obvious personal hatred that helped fuel the Kennedys' efforts to get Cohn. The combined hatred for Cohn, shared by Robert Kennedy and Robert Morgenthau, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, Morgenthau, then the U.S. Attorney in New York, resulted in Cohn being taken to court 3 times over the next few years. And we're going to talk about the 3 times Cohn was taken to court and tried, essentially by Bobby Kennedy and others. And because there's a feud, the Kennedys and the Cohns don't like each other, right? Okay. He managed to avoid being found guilty in all 3 cases, thanks to pure luck in at least one instance. The first case, so now we're going to break down the times that Cohn was, that the Kennedys went after Cohn, okay? The first case came in 1964 when a grand jury indictment charged Cohn with obstruction of justice for having tried to prevent the indictment of 4 men in a stock swindle scheme involving a company called United Dye, as well as perjury for having lied that he had done so. The case focused considerable attention on Cohn's dealings with Mo Dalitz, a mobster, and his associates, particularly those involved in the Desert Inn. So what we have is an indictment, a grand jury indictment brought about by, I think, Bobby Kennedy against Cohn, trying to tie him to the mob and various nefarious things, including lying about his ties to the mob. During the trial of Cohn, the allegation was made that Cohn had called Dalitz in June 1962, demanding that the mobster return immediately from vacation in Europe in order to assist Cohn in intimidating men tied to the United Dye swindle so they would lie under oath to a grand jury investigating the scheme. So again, Cohn, under investigation by a grand jury, indicted by a grand jury at the behest, I think, of Bobby Kennedy, actually calls in his mobster friend to say, you need to come back from your trip right now and start leaning on people, get people to shut their mouth and lie under oath to a grand jury so that I don't go to jail for my connections with you. Media reports on the case also noted that Cohn was, as previously mentioned, had been the guest of honor at Dalitz's New Year's Eve party in 1960. So again, just mainstream media in America was aware that Cohn seemed to have mobster friends. And it's like, hey, did you realize they partied together at New Year's Eve? Now, other aspects of the United Dye case, which were ignored or merely glanced over during the trial, are critical for establishing Cohn's ties, not just to organized crime during this period, but also to organized criminal activity that was intimately enmeshed with a series of CIA assets and other figures of interest in the context of this book. Lots of this book is talking about the ties between mobsters, organized crime, and the CIA and presidents. And it goes on, and it continues to this day. Is probably what the gist of this book is trying to tell you. For now, the focus will be on Cohn and how he fared against the Kennedy-led Justice Department. That's what we're focusing on in this chapter. Cohn's defense in the case was based on his assertion that the 2 Bobbies, Kennedy and Morgenthau, were after him because of personal vendettas. So Cohen's like, hey, I'm only on trial here because these guys don't like me. It's just a personal thing. It has nothing to do with me being a gangster or associated with gangsters. These guys, the freaking bobbies, don't like me. Things were not going Cohen's way in the trial, with a single juror holding out for conviction. This is where it's going to get a little crazy. Listen to this. Things were not going well in Cohen's trial, with a single juror holding out for conviction. So he had most of the jury on his side, but one was like, no, I'm going to convict this guy. So they're fighting it, right? It later emerged that Cohen and his legal team had done everything they could to have this juror, an African-American woman, replaced prior to deliberation. They tried to get her off during the trial. They knew this juror wasn't going their way. And so they were trying to get her removed from the jury during deliberations. But she, unfortunately for them, made it to the end and was in deliberations. So now they still need to have a problem. Now she's in deliberations, and now she's holding out to convict, as they assumed that she would surely vote to convict. Unfortunately for this woman, the juror, her father was killed in a car accident during deliberations, and she was excused from the jury. And the judge reluctantly ruled a mistrial as a result of her dismissal. Oh, let me reiterate. In America, fucking shit happens. So you got one holdout who's trying to convict. She won't let it go. And then her dad, oh my gosh, her dad just happened to die in a car accident. And then she's dismissed from the jury. Mistrial. We're done. Wow. I'm sure that's just a coincidence, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm sorry for shouting. I get passionate. This shit makes me angry. Because I'm sure it could be a coincidence. But how many deaths do we have to have before coincidence is no longer a coincidence? Now, when the case was retried, so that ended in a mistrial. So now they retried again, second trial. Now we're talking about the second. So remember, these 3 trials he avoided. The first one, somebody died. Shit happens. You died. Mistrial. Let's start it over. When the case was retried, it resulted in an acquittal. One of the main reasons for this shift was that Cohen's defense lawyer, Frank Reichley, had caught Sam Garfield, a key government witness, in a lie related to his denial that the government had offered him leniency for his role in the United Dye stock swindle if he testified against Cohen. That's a really hard sentence to break down. The government leaned on a guy to say, you need to testify against Cohen because we're trying to get this MFer. Bobby Kennedy wants him badly. Bobby Kennedy wants Cohen badly. And he's like, look, we're going to lean on you. You've got your own criminal record, Mr. So-and-so. We want to lean on you and say, we'll give you leniency in your case if you testify against Cohen, because that's the real dirty bastard we want. We want Cohen. When it came out, when Cohen's lawyer got proof that the government was leaning on a witness to try to, basically throw Cohen under the bus so they can convict him this time, that went positively for them and they got away with it, got the acquittal. The optics helped Cohen's vendetta defense. Remember, he was saying, these guys are just after me. And when he can prove that they were leaning on people and giving them leniency in their own criminal cases in exchange for getting a testimony against Cohen, he's like, look, I told you it was just a personal vendetta. And so goes the second trial. The second trial Cohen faced, the Fifth Avenue Coach Lines case, saw him charged with bribery, conspiracy, extortion, and blackmail for allegedly bribing a city appraiser to help his client, Fifth Avenue Coach, snare a higher award in a pending condemnation trial. This trial had a very different trajectory than the United Dye case, particularly when Cohen's defense attorney, Joseph Brill, had a heart attack in the middle of the case. Oh, shit. I'm sorry. So the first trial ends because somebody's dad dies, and we have a mistrial because they can't convict because the only person who was holding out, her father died. She's dismissed, mistrial. Now we have a new case, another case, a different case. So again, that was retried, and he got away with that because somebody was on a personal vendetta, and that looked bad. Now they have a different case, a whole different case, and this person's has Cohen's defense attorney, Joseph Brill, had a heart attack in the middle of the case. Now you say, okay, well, wait a minute. That's Cohen's attorney. Cohen's attorney had the heart attack. That can't be a murder. Well, listen to this. Brill's heart attack was suspected by some as having been a ploy so that Cohen would serve as his own defense lawyer at the trial as it drew to close. While it is debatable if such suspicions were warranted, Cohen becoming his own defense attorney allowed him to offer his own testimony without being cross-examined. So what does that mean? That means they're suggesting, some believe, that Cohen may have had his own attorney killed in order so that he could testify on his own. And when you testify in your own, being your own representative, because he decided to, since my attorney died, I'm going to represent myself. But it puts him in a unique position where he can't be cross-examined. So it gave him a great way to say what he wanted to say without it being cross-examined, because he's the attorney for himself. It also allowed him to offer an eloquent 7-hour summation, ending with a protestation of Cohn's love for America. I just love America. I love it so much. That performance saw tears stream down the cheeks of both Cohn, I love America so much, and the jurors, who then acquitted Cohn. So there's allegations, and I don't know if it's founded or not. It's just people die. So in the first trial, a woman was holding out to convict him. Her father dies. She gets dismissed, mistrial. Second time, Cohn's own attorney dies of a heart attack. And again, why you think that? Why would he kill his own attorney? Well, it allowed him to do a unique thing, which is defend himself, not have to be under cross-examination, and allowed himself to do a nice 7-hour summation where he used his speaking skills to win over a jury. And I love America so much. It went well for him. So that's what they're saying. And then the third trial they're talking about. The third trial was also related to the Fifth Avenue coach lines case, and saw Cohn accused of bribery, conspiracy, filing false reports to Securities and Exchange Commission, etc. The government's case against Cohn in this instance involved deposits that Cohn had arranged with the money Fifth Avenue coach received as a result of the condemnation award. One of those two deposits arranged by Cohn, which the government asserted provoked considerable controversy, was a deposit of $500,000 to Jeffrey's Bank in Belgium, which was made the same day that the Fifth coach received their award. So it's long and convoluted, but Fifth Avenue received a big award, and then there's a deposit made in a bank, and $100,000 of those funds were then sent to Cohn and deposited in his personal bank account the next day. So it looks like Cohn got a payoff from their settlement. That's what they're basically saying. Cohn testified that the money was a payment that he was owed by A. Newman, a friend of Cohn's with whom he had certain business dealings, and who was an officer of Jeffrey's Bank. The other mysterious deposit made by Cohn was never fully explained, according to the judge who oversaw the case, despite having been a key point of focus during the trial. Cohn was acquitted when the government's strategy of offering former business associates of Cohn leniency for testifying against him backfired yet again. So again, the government went after people and said, hey, look, you're facing criminal charges in this other case. We'll be more lenient on you if you give us dirt on Cohn. That got caught again. And again, Cohn basically said, look, these guys have it out for me. It's dirty pool. They're leaning on people and giving people deals to testify against me. So if the shoe doesn't fit, you must acquit. All right, so the appearance of A. Newman or Arno Newman in this case is worth noting. So this is where we're going to pay attention. The appearance of A. Newman in that case, who's Arno Newman, in this case is worth noting, as Newman, who used the last name Nijman in Belgium, and his family bank, named for Arno's son Jeffrey, were later tied to illegal arms deals with Israeli intelligence in the 1980s. 1980s, people, we are moving very, very quickly to modern times. So when I tell you this stuff informs what happened today, we're getting closer and closer as we move through this book to modern times. All these Israeli connections, Israeli arms, support of Israel, money in Israel. And again, Charlie Kirk, who was assassinated recently, mentioned that Israel was upset and that they were going to kill him. That's something that's been coming out lately in the news, if you've been following it. Candace Owens has been talking about this a lot lately, and it's getting a lot of airways at the moment that this video is made, for example. So during roughly the same period as the Iran-Contra affair, which we're going to cover more in Chapter 7. Some of these deals gone awry bankrupted Jeffrey's Bank in 1981, but no legal consequences for the bankruptcy ever befell the Newman-Nijman family. While these were the three cases brought against Cohn by the two Bobbies, Bobby Kennedy and Bobby Morgenthau, they were not Cohn's only trials during the period. So these are the three big ones we're talking about, but it's not the only time Cohn's been in trouble with the law. This guy gets in trouble with the law a lot. As he was also indicted for violating banking laws on more than one occasion. However, the conduct of the two Bobbies, particularly that of Robert Morgenthau, in their quest to nail Cohn ultimately resulted in a flip of the narrative in which Cohn, once seen as the attack dog from McCarthy's witch hunt against communism, now became viewed as a victim of a witch hunt himself. So Cohn managed to convince people in America that the Kennedys were after him. Bobby Kennedy was after him. It was all a personal vendetta. He's not a bad guy. All his mobster connections are bullshit. The Kennedys are just assholes, and largely use that to get out of jail free card. Now, one of the motivating factors behind the Kennedys and Morgenthal's efforts to get Cohn, that he was a crooked lawyer with organized crime ties who himself felt himself to be above the law, was also true. Nevertheless, despite their best efforts, none of the cases stuck, and their failure granted Cohn an aura of invincibility, respectability, and even sympathy. So again, the Kennedys were convinced Cohn was a crooked guy involved with the mob, and the Kennedys were going after him left and right, and they never could get Cohn. So this again leads to, did the mob kill Kennedy? The Kennedys were after Cohn because he was in bed with the mob, protected by the mob, and they could never get it to stick. Every time they try to convince people that he's mob connected, mob affiliated, he would slip through the cracks and became invincible. Now, though he had garnered some public sympathy, that does not mean that Cohn did not try to get even with his arch enemies, particularly Bobby Kennedy. So now let's move on. Vendetta begets vendetta. Vendetta. One of the many things that Roy Cohn and J. Edgar Hoover, if you remember, we covered a lot of J. Edgar Hoover and the blue rooms and the sex parties and the blackmail they had on the FBI director. All that shit's in the past. So if you haven't seen it, you need to go back and watch that. It's fascinating shit. If you're at all even remotely interested in the history, you should check it out. Hoover not only subverted the Kennedy-led effort to get Roy Cohn by passing Cohn the government's case against him on at least one occasion, he also looked for ways to bring Kennedy down. So Hoover was trying to get in the way of the Kennedys going after Cohn, and also he looked for ways to bring Kennedy himself down. This was not motivated by Kennedy's efforts to indict Cohn, but instead by his efforts as Attorney General to rein in Hoover and bring down the organized crime networks that had first blackmailed Hoover and later formed an unsavory alliance with him. So the Kennedys, in this case, if I'm reading this right, the Kennedys believe that all these mob-affiliated people, including the mob who's blackmailed the FBI director, all need to be taken down. But Kennedy can't fight the mob. So, Congressman Gallagher. Now we're going to skip ahead to Congressman Gallagher. You can read more if you want to get the bridge work between these two. Congressman Gallagher, who was making a reputation for himself in the House of Civil as a civil libertarian, a legislator committed to preventing the government from turning itself by aid of computers, lie detectors, and advanced electronics into a free world version of Big Brother. So Congressman Gallagher does not like the idea of the government spying on everybody in America, getting blackmail on everybody in America, becoming Big Brother and watching everything you do. That's the key takeaway. Congressman Gallagher fights against Big Brother state, them watching all of us and getting blackmail. Because, blackmail is a big deal. This is what the book's about. One Nation Under Blackmail. Now, according to Cornelius Neil Gallagher, Cohn called him up and asked him, this is the Congressman Gallagher. According to Cornelius Neil Gallagher, Cohn called him up and asked him if he would meet with a friend of ours who wanted to talk about some real substantive abuses that are going on in the United States that could form the basis for a series of congressional hearings. This friend was Sid Zagri, chief lobbyist for the Teamsters Union. At the time that Robert Kennedy instructed his Justice Department to target Cohn, he had also had his sights set on the organization crime-linked head of the Teamsters Union, Jimmy Hoffa, meaning that the Teamsters had their own score to settle with the Attorney General. So again, now we're getting the mobsters, Jimmy Hoffa, known mobster connection in the Teamsters, and all these guys. Robert Kennedy is trying to go after the Teamsters, trying to go after the mob. Everywhere you look, the Kennedys are waging war on the mob. That might get you killed. I think it would. Yeah. Anyways, the meeting with Zagri went forward. Zagri had brought with him a trove of documents that were aimed at Bobby Kennedy and the strike force concept, the IRS, the uses that Kennedy was making of them. According to Gallagher, Zagri said that he wanted Gallagher to host hearings on the material. When Gallagher asked how he had acquired these dangerous documents, Zagri said, "Don't worry about it. In Gallagher's version of what happened, he gave a non-committal response to Zagre about the possibility of hearings. Zagre responded stating that he had been promised by Cohn that Gallagher would do the hearings. The meeting went downhill from there and ended when Gallagher angrily rejected Zagre from his ejected him from his office. Now this gets kind of confusing, but it's at the heart of it. They're trying to bring documents to prove something, and the guy doesn't want to say where I got the documents, and so the guy doesn't want to touch it. He's like, well, if I don't know where these documents came from, I'm not moving on it. That's kind of the gist. All you need to get right now. It's not all that important at the moment. Cohn called Gallagher the next day, telling him, "You made a big mistake." To which Gallagher responded that he had not wanted to commit because he was not sure of the document's authenticity. So again, if you're going to come to me with dirt, I need to know where it's from. Cohn's warning him, dude, if you don't act on these documents that I'm not telling you where they came from, you're going to make a big mistake. You're making a big mistake. Cohn then revealed that the documents were authentic as they had come from the FBI themselves, adding they all came from Mr. Hoover. Hey, the blackmail specialist who gets blackmailed. So they don't want to reveal that the FBI got this information perhaps through nefarious ways. That's perhaps why, at the heart of this, why these documents are suspicious and why the guy didn't want to tell him where they came from, because Hoover is using blackmail and using perhaps illegal ways to get information. He's like, okay, I got this information from Hoover himself, from the FBI. They all came from Mr. Hoover and Deke Deloche, one of the two top assistants to the director. Mr. Hoover will consider it a very personal favor, he said, if you chair these hearings. He's sick and tired of the bullshit of Bobby Kennedy. So Hoover wants to use his blackmail material to go after Bobby Kennedy. God, it's getting deep. It is getting deep. Don't worry about following everything. You just need to get the high-level shit, I promise you. That's all you need is the high-level shit. Gallagher responded that he wanted to stay out of the brewing battle between Kennedy and Hoover and stated, I don't agree with what Bobby's doing. I think it's terrible, but I don't agree with what Hoover's doing. It's even worse. Cohn promised that if Gallagher did not host the hearings, the congressional hearings he wants him to do, both Hoover and the Teamster boss, Jimmy Hoffa, would shower him, or sorry, if he did host the hearings they want him to do, both Hoover and the Teamster boss, Jimmy Hoffa, would shower him with favors and aid his re-election effort. You scratch our back, we'll scratch yours. Gallagher was still unwilling to step into the ring. Cohn warned him, you're going to be sorry. I know how the FBI work. And if you're not their friend, you're their enemy. So he's like, look, the FBI wants this guy. We're going after him. It may be dirty stuff, but you better play ball or you're going to be an enemy of the FBI, and you don't want the FBI to be your enemy. And I know it's a lot. So let's just plug right through. Cohn would repeat the same thing to Gallagher a second time. This next occasion saw Gallagher receive a letter prepared for his signature that demanded that the Attorney General at the time, Nick Katzenbach, appear before a congressional committee with the authorizations for illegal bugging of civil rights activist Martin Luther King Jr. Gallagher asked who had produced this letter for him to sign, since he had never dictated it to anyone. So, hey, sign this letter that you wrote, but I didn't write this. Who did write this letter? Don't worry about it. His secretary responded that it had been Roy Cohn that had drafted the letter. Cohn then contacted Gallagher, asserting that Hoover had dictated the letter. So Hoover wrote the letter for you because he's sick and tired of Bobby Kennedy proclaiming himself to be a great liberal when he himself signed the authorizations of this bugging of Martin Luther King's offices. And again, I'm not a super history buff, but you're starting to get names that are very, very popular in history. The assassinations of Kennedy, of Martin Luther King, all these things, and all their ties to the mob and the war between the mob and the fights between the mob. And just keep paying attention to the high level shit. Because again, at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, I wonder if it was just a radical transgender loving shooter in his 20s that killed Charlie Kirk, or if there's more shit going on, maybe we're missing. All right. So Gallagher declined to do the director's bidding once more, to which Cohn again replied, you're going to be sorry. I told you before, if you're not their friend, they're your enemy. They're going to get you. So he's warning him. The FBI wants you to do this. We're giving you all kinds of dirty blackmail material, play ball, or you're going to be sorry because you don't want to be have the enemies of the FBI. Hoover made good on this threat, and in 1968, he leaked a story to Life magazine that tied Gallagher to mobster Joe Zaccarelli in the middle of Gallagher's re-election campaign. So Hoover allegedly used dirty blackmail type material and leaked it to Life magazine, showing that Gallagher had ties to the mob himself in the middle of a re-election campaign. The story relied on transcripts of taped conversations that allegedly took place between Gallagher and Zaccarelli, whose organized criminal activities and role in arms smuggling was discussed in the previous chapter. The FBI later denied the authenticity of these recordings, though some have posited that the tapes might have been authentic, with the FBI only denying their validity to avoid admitting that they had illegally wiretapped Gallagher. So the gist of this is, and I say this happens in a lot of cases. I've mentioned it probably happened. In my opinion, it happened in the Idaho 4 case of Brian Koberger. When the government does something illegal, like violating your constitutional liberties, like in this case, illegally wiretapping somebody without the proper warrants to do so, and then they try to use that information, they don't want that going to court because it's going to get them in trouble when they have to admit they broke the law, violated civil liberties, didn't get the proper paperwork. And so the FBI basically said they denied that they ever did this because that would have to admit that they illegally wiretapped Gallagher. The story in Life magazine, however, is a bit odd for a few reasons. For instance, it failed to establish any benefit to Gallagher from his alleged dealings with the mafia. So the Life magazine says, hey, this guy's connected with the mafia. But how is that relevant? They failed to make that connection. It did claim that Gallagher had asked for the mafia's help in disposing of a dead body. So the Life magazine article said that Gallagher had asked for the mafia's help in disposing of a dead body, yet Gallagher was not accused of killing him, and the person appeared to have died of natural causes, as there was no indication of foul play. So the Life magazine is talking about a real murder of which Gallagher supposedly went to the mob and said, I need help getting rid of this body. But that was odd because Gallagher wasn't accused of killing anybody. There was a natural causes death. So why would he need the mob to help them with the body if it was ruled natural causes? We're going to get to that. The article provided no explanation as to why Gallagher would not just have called a doctor or the police if the man had died of natural causes on his property. The article also asserted that Gallagher's criticism of the FBI and the Justice Department's wiretaps were mainly motivated by his purported alliance with these mafia figures. Now, I want to stop for a second. One, because I had a cough. In the movie Eyes Wide Shut, which I told you at the very beginning, there's going to be some eyes wide shut shit in this this video. In that movie, a prostitute, if you will, or is over at a rich man, a wealthy man, a Jewish wealthy man's house, and she ODs. And then they call in a doctor to try and cover it up because, hey, look, this is an embarrassment. This hooker just died here. I can't have this on my reputation explaining why this hooker died. It was natural causes. Just wrap this shit up, declare it natural causes, and let's move this shit on. This is almost exactly word for word the kind of stuff that happens. Somebody died of natural causes, but somebody doesn't want that shit out in the open. So they bring in some people to let's not talk about how this actually happened. And I know that sounds confusing, but you're going to get to it in a little bit in that whole Eyes Wide Shut shit, which is coming out again. Occult parties, orgies, sex parties, people dying at the parties. Fucking right out of the movie. Go watch that movie, by the way. That movie, I think, tells you something in its own right for deep thinkers. All right, so here we go. Considering that the FBI itself was later revealed to have been the source of the accusations detailed in the Life magazine article, as well as Hoover's own conflicts of interest related to organized crime, because he was blackmailed by the mob, allegedly, the claims about Gallagher in this article are best taken with a grain of salt. So, it's all speculation, but listen. After publication of the Life story, Gallagher claimed that he was again threatened by Hoover, with Roy Cohn again serving as the conduit. Gallagher was told that he had to resign. You must resign, or an even more sensational story will be published. This one involving a man allegedly dying in his bed after fornicating with his wife, and with Gallagher again asking for the mafia's help in disposing of the body. So now all of a sudden they're like, hey, this story, by the way, the one that we told is going to get even more salacious. We're going to talk about how this somebody was in bed with somebody else's wife and they died of natural causes. And sure, it happened of natural causes, but do you really want to explain the story about why somebody's in bed with somebody else's wife? That's going to come out in the next version of this story. Gallagher was told by both Roy Cohn and a mutual friend of theirs, Neil Welsh, that Hoover was going to have the story published in Life, unless Gallagher resigned from Congress in the next 10 days. So resign, or we're gonna do part 2 of that document, talking about who that person was banging and how they died of natural causes in bed with somebody's wife. Don't worry about the details. It's a high-level thing. According to Cohn, Hoover wanted Gallagher out of Congress because he was too dangerous for them, as he was not agreeing to Hoover's demands now on 2 occasions. So Welsh summed up the situation by telling Gallagher, you're not their friend, so you're finished. Needless to say, Gallagher did not take kindly to the threats and delivered a speech on the House floor exposing Hoover's threats and claiming that the FBI had leaked false information to Life in a plot against him. Flat out went to Congress and said the FBI is trying to finger me and try to put pressure me to cave. And he's telling that to Congress. That's probably not going to go well. So Gallagher won re-election despite the FBI director's efforts, but he was indicted in 1972 for perjury and tax evasion. Regarding Hoover's attempt to blackmail him, Gallagher later stated this: the Faustian contracts that were daily made by important parts of the United States media on these kinds of deals without any recourse as to what the hell they were really building up has become part and parcel of why we don't have a goddamn presidential candidate around anymore. You know, it's okay to talk about these things, but information is controlled, and the bastards, men like Hoover, have the information, and they use guys like Roy as their interlocutors. Interlocutors? Man, I thought I had a pretty good vocabulary. Anyways, the media being used, like Life magazine, to ruin people's political careers, being used by the FBI themselves to ruin people's political careers. All right. How are we doing on time? Okay, we're doing all right. The weaponization of the media, which I would argue is still going on. And if you haven't seen it, we've got a special called Deep Devils, where Joe from JJ from State of the Deep and I talk about the deep foundational things like the weaponization of the media and how the government uses the media and how they've been caught in bed with the media, actually hiring journalists to spin stories in the media. Anyways, the weaponization of the media, however, was but one of the methods employed by Cohn and his allies, such as Hoover is in such as Hoover in their elaborate favor bank system. This chapter is about the favor bank. All right. Cohn and Hoover understood the power of blackmail quite intimately. Cohn and Hoover, both Hoover had been blackmailed and Cohn had been blackmailed, and they then learned the blackmail secrets. Cohn and Hoover understood the power of blackmail quite intimately, and with both allegedly having been blackmailed themselves, leading to their roles in the Plaza Hotel Blue Suite parties, which we covered before. Homosexual sex parties that they were embarrassed about and that got blackmailed, and then the mob owned them because, boy, it would be a shame if people came out and found out you're cheating on your wife with a homosexual man, and it's bad time for that kind of shit. So wouldn't it be nice if you just looked the other way for the mob and let us do whatever the hell we want without prosecuting the mob? And that's what they did. Not only is there evidence of Cohn and Hoover participating in sexual blackmail rackets alongside Louis Rosenstiel and, in Hoover's case, Sherman Kaminsky, but there is also evidence of Cohn and Hoover having ties to another sexual blackmail scandal of the 1960s, one of which took place in the United Kingdom and is remembered today as the Profumo affair. Now, the Profumo affair, we're going to talk about that a lot here. So hopefully I'm not slaughtering that Profumo name. So we're going to talk about a United Kingdom scandal in the 1960s. We're also going to talk about, remember Heidi Fleiss? Do you remember the name Heidi Fleiss, the infamous madam? She's coming up later on. Oh, and Jeffrey Epstein, and that thing is all coming up soon, just to give you a little teaser. So pay attention if you started to check out. There is cool shit coming. The key link between Hoover, Cohn, and the Profumo affair is a man named Thomas Corbally. We're going to hear a lot about Corbally, who used Cohn as a conduit to pass insider information on the scandal to Hoover's FBI as it was unfolding. So about this Profumo affair. Corbally came from a family of private investigators, and his family's detective agency had close ties to organized crime. Oh, look, more mobster connections, particularly Meyer Lansky and his immediate network. These ties were extensive enough that Corbally's family used their detective agency to benefit organized crime's interests, which included spying on federal agents in the 1920s and 30s. So private investigators spying on federal agents in the 20s and 30s on behalf of the mob. In the 1950s, Corbally became a jet-setting private detective who courted the rich and famous, particularly in London and New York. During this period, he met and befriended Roy Cohn, and the two remained close, with Cohn serving as Corbally's attorney over the years. In the 1960s, Corbally, now we're leading up to the Kennedys again, in the 1960s, Corbally began living in London, sharing an apartment with William Mellon Hitchcock of the wealthy Mellon family, who was previously mentioned in chapter 1. So we had to discuss this already. While living together, Mellon, Hitchcock, and Corbally developed a reputation for throwing wild parties and orgies for the elite. Eyes wide shut. I can always hear it now. Wah, 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 wah. All that creepy music as you got all the people, all the elites with their masks on, having occult sex parties, powerful elite orgies in their house. That's straight out of Eyes Wide Shut. Do that for some homework research. I always loved that scene, by the way, but I'm not going to go there. The point being, I digress. At the same time, Corbally was courting organized crime networks in the United Kingdom, becoming close to Irish gangster Johnny Francis, who later facilitated the entry of Philadelphia mob boss Angelo Bruno into various businesses in London. Those interests included the Colony Sports Club, where Mayor Lansky associate and Washington, D.C. based mobster Joe Nesling had a significant stake. Both Bruno and Francis worked closely with Ronnie and Reggae Cray, twin brothers and nightclub owners who ran the London-based organized crime gang known as The Firm for over a decade. I know there's a lot of names. If you want to get the details and get it memorized, buy a copy of the book. Like I said, use my affiliate link down below. I can't cover it all. Already, some of you check out on this thing. So let's keep going. As Stephen Snyder and Douglas Thompson have both noted, the Cray brothers were known to have supplied rent boys or teenage boys to Lord Boothie, conservative MP and former Churchill aide, during the time that they were associated with Johnny Francis. Declassified MI5 documents reveal that British intelligence was aware of Boothie Cray's association that included sex parties and rent boys, teenage boys, at a time when these events took place, with these documents also referred to both Boothby and Ronnie Cray as hunters of young men. So again, not a good thing to be outed at this time by young, potentially underage teenage boys. I don't know. Corbally was not only plugged into the more powerful crime networks in the UK, but he was also a member of the Claremont Club, an elite group of gamblers in the 1960s London. Many of Claremont's members became extremely powerful during the government of Margaret Thatcher. Several members also developed close ties to Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father, and global arms trade. Ghislaine Maxwell, Madam of Jeffrey Epstein. It has been said that Robert Maxwell worked for the Mossad, worked for Israeli intelligence. Ghislaine Maxwell was likely working for Israeli intelligence. Jeffrey Epstein was likely working for Israeli intelligence. So when we get to the whole who killed Charlie Kirk, and I tell you that I think it had something to do with them pressing for the Epstein files, wait till you see what happens. It's going to be a very similar thing happens in this that may inform us what happened. And again, so now we're coming up to Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell's father, Robert Maxwell. Sterling and Rowland in particular had significant ties to the global arms trade, as well as a relationship with Saudi weapons dealers Adnan Khashoggi, who later became a client of Roy Cohn, as well as Jeffrey Epstein, around the same time, as well as a key figure in the Iran-Contra affair. Jeffrey Epstein's name, by the way, is going to be associated with everybody up and down the thing. And again, the allegations is that these people ran elaborate honeypot systems. They would use sex to blackmail powerful elite men in government, and then governments would own other governments and people, because they would get you to do unsavory things, perhaps with underage girls. That's Jeffrey Epstein's alleged thing, or underage boys. That was maybe Cohn's thing. And then they would use that to blackmail your government and get you to do whatever the hell they want. Roland Walter Rowland. So it's two different ways. If you look at it on the screen, it's two different spellings of Roland because one's a first name, one's a last name. That's confusing. Better known as Tiny Rowland, was also a very close associate to Robert Maxwell. That's the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, the madam of Jeffrey Epstein, who was also a fellow Claremont Club member and corporate raider, James Goldsmith. Goldsmith not only had ties to Maxwell, but also to white-collar crime-linked figures, including Charles Keating, Michael Milken, and later Jeffrey Epstein. Both Keating and Milken were directly connected to the savings and loan scandal of the 1980s. Oh my God. Every major freaking thing in this country, like the big, huge savings and loan scandal, which itself was a huge amount of corruption, have mobsters' names tied to it, Israeli mobster names tied to it, Epstein kind of names tied to it. It's one big, gigantic clusterfuck. And trust me, I don't blame you for not having it all followed out. I just hope that you understand the high level shit. Man, it's interesting that these names keep coming up and all these people keep dying, including Charlie Kirk. I'm sure that was just shot by some radical liberal. I'm sure that's what it was. It has nothing to do with all the mob ties and all the shit that's been fucking going on in this country since way back in the 20s. I'm sure it has nothing to do with the mob. All right. So, let's read that sentence again. Both Keating and Milken were directly connected to the savings and loan scandal of the 1980s. That, according to Pete Bruton and others, was largely the result of a collaboration between the CIA and organized crime. A collaboration between the CIA and organized crime. The Goldsmith-Epstein connection is revisited in Chapter 11. Yeah, we will get a lot more into Jeffrey Epstein. I'm almost certain of it. And it's all going to come. And as you move forward, it's getting closer and closer to modern time. Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself, people. And if you think he did, you need to spend a little bit more time in the critical thinking chair. Just put the critical thinking hat on and just sit there for a while and think about shit. Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. Figure it out. All right. in my opinion, oh my God, maybe I need to say in my opinion, because somebody's going to sue me like Jeffrey Epstein did kill himself and you just said it wrong. We know he did. No, I do not know he did. I don't believe he killed himself. That is a personal opinion. So I have no proof Jeffrey Epstein killed himself. That's how I get myself out of trouble. In the context of Corbally and the Profumo affair, another very important member of the Claremont Club was a man by the name of Stephen Ward. Ward was an osteopath who became intimately acquainted with top figures in Britain's aristocracy through Averell Harriman. Harriman was the former governor of New York, whose Wall Street firm Brown Brothers and Harriman Company had been financially entangled with assets of Nazi Germany well after World War II had begun. Harriman's bank employed, let's see, could it be George H.W. Bush's father, Prescott Bush, involved with Nazi Germany war funds? Yeah, that is the kind of shit conspiracy theorists have been talking about for a long time. Did you know the Bushes were involved in Nazi money and German Nazi money? Yeah, they were, allegedly, according to historians. But I'm sure that has nothing to do with anything. So, Harriman's bank employed George H.W. Bush's father, Prescott Bush, and maternal grandfather of George Herbert Walker Bush. Many of the attendees of Thursday Club dinners, so we're going to move to this thing called the Thursday Club. Many of the attendees of the Thursday Club dinners were involved in sex parties, such as those hosted by Corbally and Mellon Hitchcock. Newham was also a regular host of such parties at his apartment in Piccadilly, some of which featured girls dressed only in Masonic aprons. Naked girls in Masonic aprons, kind of a thing, and your wild sex parties for the elite, eyes wide shut. Ward regularly attended Newman's sexually explicit get-togethers as well as analogous events hosted by elite members of British society. Ward's talents were quickly recognized by British intelligence outfits MI6, which had a reputation for targeting and visiting dignitaries in the UK with sexual blackmail operations, and recognized Ward's potential in this regard. Full stop. This is exactly what Jeffrey Epstein is alleged to have been doing, running a sexual trap to bring in high-level dignitaries and trap them, getting them to have sex with underage girls while it's being secretly filmed. And then you're like, hey, by the way, it'd be a shame if your wife found out that you were banging a 15-year-old girl at our house, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that ruin your career and ruin your marriage? And so maybe you should play ball. And that's how people get owned, allegedly. And that's allegedly what Jeffrey Epstein was doing. But of course, most of America, not you, because if you're watching this channel, you're smarter than that, but most of America want to do Jeffrey Epstein was a pedophile. One, the 15-year-old girl does not make you a pedophile. Two, they were used for blackmail on people. It wasn't even about the sex. It was about blackmail, in my opinion. And it doesn't make it right. Please, for God's sake, don't think that I just said it makes it right for you to bang underage girls. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is it's not about his proclivity for underage girls. That was all a honeypot to blackmail politicians. That's all it's about. So if you want to take the easy way out like a moron and be like, oh my God, he's such a sick little pedophile. Of course he killed himself. He's a sick pedophile. No, he was a businessman fucking corrupting governments, getting people to commit crimes on camera and then blackmailing them, allegedly. And people who want to bring that out and say, hey, we want to know who visited Jeffrey Epstein, who's blackmailed by Jeffrey Epstein. Oh no, if you keep pushing for that shit, somebody's going to shoot you. Charlie Kirk was pushing who was visiting Jeffrey Epstein, who's on his blackmail books, and he was killed. I'm sure it's a coincidence. All right. We might be able to get this done in about 10 minutes. Let's see if we can do it. Hoover's FBI got the inside scoop from Corbally and began investigating other women of interest in Stephen Ward's circle while the Profumo affair was just beginning. Corbally kept the FBI informed of developments in the scandal through Roy Cohn, Corbally's longtime friend and attorney. In the public's release of the FBI case files on the affair, nicknamed the Bowtie Dossier, the informant that Cohn gave to the FBI is entirely censored, as is a 17-page interview that the FBI had with Corbally. One of the reasons for these extensive redactions, so we don't get to know shit, because the government doesn't want you to know what's going on, because it would look really bad and America would probably be a little bit irritated. One of the reasons for these extensive redactions likely owes to the ties between other women associated with Stephen Ward and efforts to sexually blackmail John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy allegedly was a skirt chaser, and guys found out that if John F. Kennedy's a skirt chaser and he wants women, we can blackmail John F. Kennedy. We can just get him to commit an affair on his wife. We can get him caught with a woman in bed, a la Marilyn Manson and any other woman that want to get, and we can blackmail a president, and now we own the president. Okay? So one of the reasons for the extensive redactions likely owes to the ties between other women associated with Stephen Ward in an effort to sexually blackmail John F. Kennedy. Peter Dale Scott discusses this subject in the book Deep Politics and the Death of JFK, drawing particularly on the network of Anthony Summers in Official and Confidential. Mayor Lansky had, by the 1930s, acquired compromising evidence of Hoover's homosexual activities. In the 1950s, Mayor Lansky and other mob figures, such as Sam Giancana, supplied women to John F. Kennedy, some of whom were logged into Hoover's growing files of dirt on the young senator. So when he was a senator, John F. Kennedy was tagging women, and people were providing women to him. And Hoover, who had learned how to blackmail people in America, because he himself was blackmailed in the sex parties, was like, I can use this. I got blackmailed dirt on Senator John F. Kennedy because he's banging women, and I've got the tapes because that's what I've learned to blackmail people. In 1960s, this deep political equilibrium was threatened by Robert Kennedy's war on organized crime. So Robert Kennedy is going to war with the mob. His brother John F. Kennedy's a skirt chaser. They've got him blackmailed. Fuck. Our country's a mess. Wouldn't it be nice if men could just keep their dick in their pants? That would probably be a good thing. But no, if you're a president, you're probably banging half of the people that get brought in. Anyways, that's a side thing. And by the way, if you have some favorite president that you like to shit on, oh, that guy was caught having an affair. Fucking probably every president has had an affair. It's part of the nature of that business. They bring women to presidents. Anyways, I'm fucking off on a rant. Let's get out of that. It'd just be nice if men in power could keep their dick in their pants. That would probably be good, right? All right. Feeling increasingly threatened, especially after the Kennedys began to collect their own files on Hoover. So everybody's blackmailing everybody. That's why we're calling this book One Nation Under Blackmail. Feeling increasingly threatened, especially after the Kennedys began to collect their own files on Hoover, both Hoover and the mob began to escalate their collection of Kennedy sexual dirt. Both sides are trying to get blackmail on each other, and sexual blackmail is the number one thing. If you can get to somebody's kinks, people will do a lot of shit for some good. For a piece, for a good piece. A lot of people will do a lot of things for a good piece. So you get somebody that has a proclivity towards wanting a piece, and you've got them. So now they're blackmailing each other left and right on sexual things because they can't help it. They can't help it. At first, Hoover gained White House influence by protecting the Kennedys against mob blackmail. But in 1963, Hoover, desperate, began to leak some of his own dirt on Kennedy to the public. Hoover's sexual dirt on the Kennedys began to surface in June of 1963 after the president's peace speech at an American university with its appeal, "Let us re-examine our attitudes towards the Cold War." On June 20th, the United States and the Soviet Union signed an agreement establishing a hotline between the Kremlin and the White House. A week later, there was a flurry of veiled hints linking the president to the Prufoma story, such as the Drew Pearson, Jack Anderson column for June 29. Quote, Britishers who read American criticism of Profumo threw back the question, what high American official was involved with Marilyn Monroe? Who in the U.S., who in America has got a relationship with Marilyn Monroe? And here comes the story of John F. Kennedy, rumored to have an affair with Marilyn Monroe. On the same day, in a front page story, the Hearst paper in New York, the Journal American, linked the Christine Keeler Stephen Ward sex ring itself to a high U.S. aide, one of the biggest names in American politics. Back in 1960, after his election, but before his inauguration, then the president, that's Kennedy, had slept with two members of the ring, including Mariella Novotny, a former stripper in London's club Possbly. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that one right. All right, so let's talk about Mariella Novotny and see if we can get through with this in my hour time that I shoot for. Mariella Novotny, born Stella Marie Capes, or whatever, Capes, or whatever, met Stephen Ward through her job as a stripper at the Mayfair nightclub, The Black Sheep. The owner of that club, Horace Dibben, was a close friend of Ward's who also had an interest in sex parties. Dibben's sex parties were alleged to have a notably occult element with allegations of black magic and men in masks. Eyes wide shut. I got all the men standing around their robes. Fidelio. The code is Fidelio. I'm sorry, that's not the code, sir. Anyways, I can't, that fucking movie is actually brilliant. But anyways, Eyes Wide Shut. Go see it if you haven't seen it. Fidelio. Don't use that term. It's not the code. All right. So anyways, so they got the allegations of black magic, men in masks, as well as ritual sadomasochism. We won't go there. Based around the master-slave dynamic. Novotny was directly involved in Dibben's occult-themed sex parties, which reportedly attracted prominent individuals in Harold Macmillan's government as VIP guests as well as Stephen Ward. So again, sex parties for the elite with occult ritual type of stuff right out of freaking Eyes Wide Shut. Yeah, homework assignment, go watch Eyes Wide Shut. Novotny was subsequently whisked away from London to New York, where she began working as an upscale prostitute, serving a lengthy list of powerful men out of 4 different apartments just months after she arrived. Here you go, the big names coming that you probably may have remembered if you have a certain age in this country, because you'll recognize this. She had been brought to New York through her affair with Harry Alan Towers, a British television producer, and both were charged with operating a sexual blackmail ring in New York that specifically targeted UN diplomats and other men of influence. John F. Kennedy was also reportedly one of her clients. Okay. Again, powerful men being seduced by sex, both legal and illegal, because it doesn't even have to be illegal. It can just be if you're a married man and you ran your presidency on I'm a great Catholic and I'm a great man and I'm such a Christian, and then you find out that you're banging people and they got pictures of you banging people, that it's going to ruin you whether it was underage or not. If you're Jeffrey Epstein, you get people not only that, but you get them if they have a proclivity to underage girls. That's a double whammy. That's like freaking double weight. Now, before she fled the U.S. in 1961, Novotny left her address book, replete with the names and contact information of America's rich and powerful, with the FBI. She left her address book with names of the FBI. This is, by the way, sounding exactly like Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein has books of who visited his clients, his sexual clients, his underage sexual clients. Jeffrey Epstein has a book. People want that book released. They want the names of people who were deleted. Charlie Kirk wanted the names of Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book of Contacts released. The government, by the way, after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, said, you know what, we decided not to release those names. No shit, you don't want to release those names. That's why he was killed in the first place. He was making, in one of my theories, one of the reasons Charlie Kirk was killed in the first place is he was pushing for the names of the Black Book. Who Charlie Epstein? I'm never going to stop conflating Jeffrey Epstein and Charlie Kirk, apparently. So Charlie Kirk was pushing for Jeffrey Epstein's files, and who was visiting I did it again, Jeffrey Epstein's little island and his little Black Book of Contacts. And our government does not want those names released. Our president will fight tooth and nail to keep those names from coming out. This is not political. Don't make this about Trump. Don't you freaking make this about Trump, even though Trump allegedly is in that Black Book, by the way, allegedly. But it's not about Trump. It's Clinton's on the list too. So if you want a Democrat, it's not Democrat, Republican. Clinton's on the list as well as a president who went to Jeffrey Epstein's island and had relations with underage girls, maybe because he's in the Black Book as well. So Clinton's on the list, we know. Trump's on the list, we know, and more names are on the list, but they don't want us to know. And again, just because these people visited the island is not proof that they did anything immoral or wrong. So let me make that clear, because that's what some of you are going to say. You just slandered the president of the United States. No, I didn't. I'm saying that it has come out in sources that these men had visited Epstein's island. That's known. What they did there, I don't know. Probably played chess or checkers, maybe. That's probably, or they got financial advice from him because Epstein was a brilliant businessman. That's probably what it was. It was probably fine. It probably had nothing to do with the fact that he had a private island outside of any jurisdiction and there was no laws there that could arrest him for anything that happened on his private island. I'm sure it had nothing to do with anything that could take place on an island where there's no law. It was probably they went there to play some checkers. The other women linked to both Stephen Ward and the efforts to sexually blackmail John F. Kennedy was Susie Chang, a former nurse turned model who moved to London at 19. How Chang met Ward is still unknown, though Chang later described Ward as a good friend, whom she had met sometime in the early 1950s. Novotny was the source of the claim that Chang had sex with John F. Kennedy, which is possible given that Chang was in the U.S. in both 1960 and 61. Chang acknowledged her knowing Kennedy, but denied having sex with him. According to Snyder, that she reportedly denied the affair with less and less vigor as time went by, however. Another noteworthy event that, according to Snyder, was more indicative of shadowy purposes was Chang's mother hiring the law firm of former OSS chief William Donovan to secure Susie Chang's visa to the U.S. in 1962. The year 1962 was critical. It was a critical year for John Kennedy, as it was also happened to be the year that the Profuma affair had surfaced. Peter Dale Scott points out that reports attempting to link President Kennedy to the Profuma affair only emerged after Kennedy's June 1963 speech. That speech deeply unsettled the anti-communist network that included Hoover, Cohn, and others. So Kennedy gave a speech that upset people like Cohn, Hoover, those who have blackmail material, and they was like, fuck that guy. We're going after him. We're going to expose his little dirty sexual secrets we know about. And stories attempting to tie Kennedy to Profuma's scandal were published in the Hearst Journal American. So again, the mob using their ties to media to put out dirt to try to start smearing John F. Kennedy because he was making that life hard for them. Time is long a little bit, so I'm going to try to finish this up. Roy Cohn was longtime close personal friends of Richard Berlin, the top manager of the Hearst newspaper conglomerate, which owned the Journal American. Cohn was notorious for placing stories in the Hearst newspapers, as well as publications controlled by his other close friends, such as Cy Newhouse, for the benefit of his clients and his network. The Profuma affair was probably Corbali's most notable tie to the sex blackmail ring, but it was hardly his only such connection. Years later, Corbali was deeply connected to the so-called Hollywood madam Heidi Fleiss. Years later, Corbali is deeply connected to the so-called Hollywood madam Heidi Fleiss, as well as the VIP S&M scandal in the Hamptons. If you haven't heard of Heidi Fleiss, do a little Google search on Heidi Fleiss. The spelling's right there. I just highlighted it on the screen. Heidi Fleiss. Famous madam with a black book, by the way, of all kinds of clients. And that shit started to bring down and topple kings, because who was in Heidi Fleiss's little book? That prostitute had herself a nice little, or that madam had herself a nice little list of men who were being blackmailed, because that's how we blackmail governments. We get them to do sexual things with people, and then we blackmail them. It would be a shame if your wife found out, if America found out that you're a good Christian man banging chicks on the side, whether they're underage or not. It's a bad thing for you. And people tend to die over shit like that. Corbali claimed in the case of the latter to have started that ring, which he said had been imported from the UK. He was also said to possess numerous pictures of various individuals engaged in some rather strange sexual practices that were staples of those parties, like those occult sex parties. Another important association of Corbali's, though not tied necessarily to sexual blackmail, was his connection to Jules Kroll of Kroll and Associates, with many early Kroll employees crediting Corbali for the firm's initial success. Kroll and Associates, long known as the CIA of Wall Street and believed by French intelligence to have been an actual front for the CIA, makes few yet critically important appearances in the last days of Robert Maxwell, that's the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, the madam of Jeffrey Epstein, and other events related to the Maxwells' posthumous legacy in the U.S., which are discussed more in Chapter 15. All right, I'm going to skip ahead to see how close we are to the end. Okay, we are very close. Looks like I've got one more quote to get, and we are out. So we're right about on time. I just wanted to make sure, because we hit the 1 hour mark, and I don't like to go much longer than an hour. Jones was known. We skipped ahead to Roland Jones, so we're just going to skip ahead. Jones was known in Chicago's organized crime scene, who had relocated to Texas in 1947 and was implicated in narcotics trafficking. He also incidentally had connections to Jack Ruby, born Jacob Robenstein, the gangster who is best known for killing Lee Harvey Oswald after assassinating John F. Kennedy. So all you need to know, John F. Kennedy had pissed off the mob. Someone killed John F. Kennedy, and it was and that was Lee Harvey Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald said, "I'm a patsy. I didn't do it. I've been set up. Somebody else killed John F. Kennedy. I'm just a patsy." And then before he could talk longer or have a trial, Jack Ruby, also connected to the mob, came up and shot and killed him. Jack Ruby had himself a little condition and was going to die anyways, and it was just all neat little package. And everyone around John F. Kennedy's assassination and whatever all ended up having mysterious accidents and died, because shit happens in this country. People just fucking die. So there you are, people. It's just another one of those shit just happens. And you can continue to live under a rock all you want and say that, man, it's just weird that people, it's so weird that people just seem to die when they're related to, the Kennedys or the mob or Israeli intelligence or Jeffrey Epstein or whatever. It's just weird that people just keep dying. But man, life is strange that way. People just fucking die. So anyways, there you go. Shades of Gray. Oh my God, let's not go to 50 Shades of Gray. Are we going to go to 50 Shades of Gray? Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed listening to another chapter. It was the back end of chapter 4 of One Nation Under Blackmail by Whitney Webb. If you like this, again, please subscribe to my channel. Go back and watch this entire playlist on the One Nation Under Blackmail if you like this format of delivery. And or if you want to follow along, get your own copy of the book by clicking on my affiliate link here and read the book with me and give me a little spiff by buying that book through my affiliate link. I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great day.